Hi, I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I'm Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is on the vintage case of the Zoot Suit riots. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back. Hi, Dr. Scott. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, we got another vintage episode for you guys this week. We had a really nice watch party. I forgot the words last night for our last vintage episode because we covered Lana Turner. And last night we watched The Postman Always Rings Twice.
That was the first. That was the first time I'd ever seen it. And
Me too.
There were some moments of it that were like really great, but it's not a great movie. And one of our Patreon members tried to warn us.
I know.
I mean, this is a guy who's a movie buff beyond movie buffs. And he was so kind the way he says, like, it's not really one of the best ones.
But I mean, classic noir, like as soon as it opened up, I'm like, this is beautiful. But yeah, I think you nailed it. You said, God, this is really like jumping around. It felt very choppy, but it was fun.
Well, now, that being said, the trivia that John and I were both dropping in the chat kind of shows that this book itself is so steamy that it took 12 years to get it produced. And then they had to keep cutting things. So that's probably why.
Right.
But still, there's some great noir stuff in it. I don't know. Maybe if you're half watching it on TCM, it might be.
Yeah, while you're doing some chores around the house.
Right,
no, it's always a great time to hang out with our Patreon friends. So it was a fun little Saturday night. We are also thrilled to announce that we're going to be appearing at the Berkshire Podcast Festival. So this is created by Josh Hallmark of True Crime Bullshit fame and many other shows, of course. And most recently, Unsafe Spaces, where Dr. Scott has had quite an appearance and contribution. So that's awesome. We're just excited. A new festival. I know he did it last year, but it'll be cool to do something different. These smaller ones are just so neat. And this is a great location. I don't know. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, look, it'll be a beautiful time of year, and
Yes.
It'll be a nice little bookend to our very busy summer.
Yeah. So that will be in October. Head over to BerkshirePodcastFestival.com to check out what's planned for the weekend. But if you're planning on going, and you are a Patreon member of ours, we are going to have some killer discounts for you soon, probably next month, April. So maybe hang tight if you want to book accommodations or whatever and do that. But as far as tickets to the event, stay tuned on Patreon for some discounts for you guys. So Josh is so kind to be able to do that for us.
Yes. So last week's episode was on the phenomenon of copycat crimes, and that is the emulation of existing criminals' activities or existing historical crimes. And while this phenomenon is not unprecedented, it does raise a lot of questions about a wide spectrum of drives and motivations for criminal actions. There have been numerous instances throughout recent history of individuals imitating notorious real-life serial killers, as well as perpetrators drawing inspiration from films like Scream, Natural Born Killers, and even TV shows like Dexter. So if you haven't had the chance to listen, please revisit that episode as we pull up some fascinating research and disturbing case examples.
Yes. And again, thanks to our listeners for suggesting that topic. It turned out to be a good episode.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So turning to today, we are going to be covering a horrible racist smudge on the sheen of Los Angeles' history. What is commonly known as the Zoot Suit riots includes a number of violent attacks throughout the streets of downtown Los Angeles and beyond, where mobs of U.S. servicemen, off-duty law enforcement officers, and other civilians targeted and beat young Latinos and other minorities. The events of June 1943 took their name from the fashion-forward baggy suits worn by many of the minority youths during that era. However, the violence was certainly more about racial tension than fashion. So as you can imagine, today, guys, we're going to be talking about some racially motivated attacks and beatings, some quite severe. And then, of course, there'll be some racially motivated language that goes along with that, but it's not too bad. So we've, again, kind of left some gruesome details out, but wanted to give you guys a heads up.
Well, I think you make actually a really sort of incisive point there about what existing information there is about the Zoot Suit riots. And while it's well known to anybody who's been an Angelino or is interested in race relations or, social justice, it's not really well known around the country. And there's not a lot of writing on it compared to
Yeah.
other big cultural movements or cultural shifts on perspective of marginalization of minorities in this country. There's only a handful of movies about it. I mean, several TV shows and movies do refer to it, but
Hmm.
it's surprising how little information there is out there that's in the public discussion
I
and presented
totally
as media.
agree with you. I mean, I didn't even think to sort of prep it that way, but until we did this, I thought the Zoot Suit riots was like one incident in LA on one night, and that was
Right.
it.
Right.
Like just one melee, and then it was over with. And it certainly was not that. So,
Right. And it's also something that was echoed across the country and didn't get a lot of attention. And, and the newspapers played a big part in that, and media at the time played a part in that.
of
There
course,
were some voices in
yes.
major newspapers that wrote about it very frankly, but then there were just as many voices that were willing to fan the flames. But let me take a step back and let's give some historical context. And we're going to talk about the world of fashion as well. So in the 1930s, dance halls really emerged as a very popular spot for socialization, social gatherings, and of course, swing dancing, which would have been amazing, of course. Like that sort of high energy and engagement would have been wonderful. And it served a purpose at the time as being a means to alleviate some of the economic strain of the Great Depression. Nowhere was this more evident than in Harlem, New York, the epicenter of the renowned Harlem Renaissance. In Harlem, fashion savvy dancers adopted loose fitting attire that emphasized their movements and gave them freedom of movement as well. And those were inspired by African American comedy shows from the 1920s. And in these shows, comedians like Pigmeat Markham and Stepin Fetchit popularized the style by wearing very baggy suits for their routines. The style continued into the 30s with men sporting baggy trousers with carefully tapered cuffs to prevent tripping, long jackets with heavily padded shoulders and wide lapels, along with long glittering watch chains and various hats from pork pies and fedoras. You know that Dr. Shiloh and I just love those fedoras, right?
Maybe on a Zoot Suit, I will
On a
take it.
zoot suit, maybe. Even extending to broad brimmed sombreros in some styles. This distinctive style, known as Zoot Suit, gained rapid popularity, especially through influential performers like Cab Calloway, who hailed it as the ultimate in clothes, a quintessentially American civilian suit.
I remember Cab Calloway in this bright yellow Zoot Suit in one of
Yeah.
Janet Jackson's videos. That's the
Yeah.
only like way that I know him. And I just thought, God, he is the coolest person ever.
Well,
And
and it's
then,
important. We're putting a peg in there. I mean, it's interesting that
yeah,
you bring it so far forward to a Janet Jackson video, but
yes,
going all the way back to the 30s and 40s, starting with African Americans, right? So another
yes.
marginalized population within the US, especially at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I just love that exposure to him. And then I was like, God, she's so cool to like weave this into
Right.
her video and her narrative for that song. So over time, this baggy style evolved into a more fashionable trend, particularly among tap and Lindy Hop dancers who found the loose fitting suits conducive to their moves out there on the dance floor. Jazz and jump blues singers further popularized the Zoot Suit. Although originating among the African American population, the Zoot Suit later gained popularity among various ethnic groups, including Mexican, Filipino, Italian, and Japanese Americans in the 1940s. A major shift occurred from style and ease of movement to fashion to full on political statements in conjunction with the influences of cultural emergence and diversity from World War II. This unfortunately led to its association with rebellion and cultural identity. And to make matters worse, during the war's rationing period, the extravagant use of fabric in zoot suits drew much criticism, and the War Production Board attempted to even restrict their sale. The tensions surrounding the Zoot Suit reached a boiling point during the Zoot Suit riots of today's episode, where predominantly Mexican Zoot Suiters faced violent attacks from white servicemen.
Previous periods of warfare have generally included significant amounts of rationing across the board: food, machinery, production materials, all of that. I mean, there's a whole episode that we could do as a standalone just on the grift that happened because of rationing during wartime, but
Right.
we'll just put it on the list. And it's
Every
also
time,
been,
I'm sorry, on our friends at LA Meekly, every time they talk about the war and rationing, they're like, everything. They're like, chocolate's being rationed, peanut butter's being rationed.
yeah,
Like you couldn't do anything.
exactly,
They needed it
exactly.
to make
Which,
it into bullets.
right, but exactly, needed that chocolate for bullets. It has been covered really well in some good documentaries, probably back in the 90s on modern marvels and stuff like that.
Mm,
But I would love to do or talk more about it on an episode in the future. But basically, this was a version of psyops, right? It was a strategy that was used by the government to present the need to ration food and production lines in order to support the war effort. And while some were legitimate, there's research that shows that the metal rationing and donation efforts were actually meant to solidify general population support for war efforts. Cloth was also included, but even with war rationing and restrictions, there were bootleg tailors in cities around the country that continued to produce the very popular Zoot Suits. With fervent flames fanned by the media, servicemen and citizens alike began to perceive the flashy and very full suits being a disrespectful and unpatriotic waste of much needed resources, because we all know how much silk and fine wool is needed for uniforms. Now, that being said, because I'm sure some war expert's going to come and say silk was needed for parachutes, it was
right.
nylon. I mean, there was a lot for it, but it's about the perception and how the perception was
Yes.
like, let's make an excuse to really get, I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of Zoot Suits took away from making army tents? I don't,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. You're shrouding your racism in that fine wool, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As a Zoot Suit trend spread among young men in Black, Mexican American, and other minority communities, it garnered a racially charged reputation. In California, Latino youths referred to as pachucos, often dressed in flashy Zoot Suits, pork pie hats, dangling watch chains, and were increasingly perceived by affluent whites as menacing street thugs, gang members, or rebellious delinquents. However, the Zoot Suit became a symbol of cultural pride and defiance for Mexican Americans, particularly in the Chicano movement, which sought to combat oppression and promote civil rights. Basically, what we're talking about here is kids who wanted to dress a certain way that made them stand out, made them feel
Yes.
good, not unlike any other time in history. And then the adults are standing over there going, wait, what's that? That looks weird.
Exactly.
So, despite efforts to ban or stigmatize the Zoot Suit, its legacy endured, experiencing a resurgence in the swing revival era of the 1990s and remaining a symbol of cultural pride for the Chicano community today.
During and after World War II, the United States faced a labor shortage as many able bodied men left to serve in the military. Those that returned from the military were given priority in well paying factory jobs and in the booming sector of manufacturing. There was, however, a distinct shortage of workers in agricultural settings. And in order to address this shortfall, the U.S. government initiated programs to recruit workers from various sectors. One such initiative involved an agreement with Mexico to bring temporary workers into the United States to fulfill labor demands. So, in this familiar and never ending story here in the US, the influx of Mexican workers was met with resistance and animosity from certain segments of white American society. Racial prejudices and fear of economic competition fueled these tensions, aggravating already existing social divides among the populations that identified as white but had vastly different cultural backgrounds in their European extractions.
White Americans viewed the arrival of Mexican workers as a threat to their job opportunities and livelihoods. Tale as old as time, right? Are we still hearing about that in California or what?
Right. And there's a really famous article that gets sent around every once in a while that's really good because it talks about how the flames of this were fanned so intensely that they did this recruitment among white teenage males to like, get out, come out and work in the fields. None of them lasted more than a day and a half. Well, no, they had buses of them. They had buses of them, took them out to the field, and they were like, yeah, we're going to earn some money. And then they got out there and saw how backbreaking it was in the hot sun. The most anyone lasted was a day and a half.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Racist attitudes towards Mexican immigrants were compounded by stereotypes and discriminatory beliefs prevalent at the time. And the growing presence of Mexican workers in the workforce intensified racial tensions in communities already grappling with issues of segregation and inequality. The perceived competition for jobs, combined with deeply entrenched racial prejudices, created a hostile environment ripe for conflict. As a result, the arrival of Mexican workers became a flashpoint for racial tensions, laying the groundwork for the violence and unrest that erupted during the Zoot Suit riots in Los Angeles.
Dating back to the early 20th century, Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans encountered racial segregation, economic exploitation, and limited access to educational and employment opportunities. Urban planning policies like redlining systematically confined Mexican communities to segregated neighborhoods characterized by substandard housing, inadequate infrastructure, and limited municipal services. These areas, often referred to as barrios, were subject to neglect by city authorities, and this just served to perpetuate cycles of poverty and disenfranchisement among its Mexican residents.
The Los Angeles Times, in its coverage of the era, highlighted the pervasive racial prejudice that marginalized Mexican Americans to the fringes of society. A 1935 article titled "Mexicans Cite Bias in Schools" reported on the unequal treatment of Mexican American students who were segregated to inferior, overcrowded schools with very limited resources. This segregation not only deprived Mexican American children of quality education, but also sustained and actually promoted cycles of poverty and marginalization within their communities. The housing sector was another battleground for racial segregation, as they encountered systematic barriers to homeownership and faced exclusionary practices in predominantly white neighborhoods. In 1937, the Los Angeles Examiner exposed the discriminatory practices of landlords and real estate agents who enforced restrictive covenants to prevent Mexican Americans from buying or renting homes in desirable areas. These discriminatory housing policies reinforced racial segregation, creating virtual boundaries that combined Mexican American families to overcrowded and dilapidated neighborhoods with limited access to essential services that were readily available to other citizens.
They were subjected to racial profiling, police brutality, and legal discrimination, which reinforced their status as second-class citizens, including institutionalized racism within the criminal justice system, where they faced significantly disproportionate rates of arrest, incarceration, and police brutality. A 1940 article in the Los Angeles Herald highlighted the systemic bias against Mexican Americans, who were often targeted by law enforcement for minor infractions and subjected to harsher punishments compared to their white counterparts. Deeply ingrained systemic discrimination not only undermined their rights, but also perpetuated cycles of poverty and disenfranchisement within their own communities. Law enforcement agencies targeted Mexican neighborhoods through aggressive policing tactics, leading to higher rates of arrest and harassment. And the criminalization of Mexican youth in particular contributed to perceptions of delinquency and criminality associated with the Mexican community.
And then we have discriminatory practices in the workplace, including low wages, exploitative labor conditions, and limited job opportunities, which further marginalized Mexicans and perpetuated this economic inequality. These pervasive forms of marginalization created a climate of social tension and resentment that ultimately erupted in the Zoot Suit riots, fueled by deep-seated racial animosity and socioeconomic disparities. Tensions were running high in the summer of 1943, racial tensions that were focused on grievances between Zoot Suiters and the large group of white sailors and soldiers stationed in and around Los Angeles. Even though Mexican Americans were themselves serving in the U.S. military in significantly high numbers, the view of Zoot Suiters was a negative one. One of the recurring complaints and accusations by servicemen was that the Zoot Suit wearers were World War II draft dodgers. And this was absolutely untrue, as the vast majority of Zoot Suiters were not even old enough to enlist in the military. So again, this perception of, hey, you're just out here draft dodging, wearing a fancy suit, going to the bars every night, is really guys that were too young.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, a lot of people fell for that framework and allowed themselves to act out in violence and other forms of marginalization. But the catalyst igniting the volatile racial tensions of the Zoot Suit riots can be traced back to a notorious event called the Sleepy Lagoon murder in August 1942. And this is a really terrible event. It unfolded near one of the reservoirs outside Los Angeles proper, where a group of men identified as Zoot Suiters engaged in a violent altercation during a party. By dawn, the lifeless body of Jose Guillardo Diaz, a young immigrant, lay near the lagoon, shrouding the community in ultimate shock and grief. In the aftermath, the wheels of injustice turned quite swiftly, leading to the wrongful conviction of 22 Mexican-American youths for Diaz's murder. The incident unraveled against a backdrop of simmering racial tensions that we've discussed, fueled by biased media portrayal and systemic discrimination within the criminal justice system. The trial, tainted by coerced testimonies and very flimsy evidence, became a stark reflection of deep-seated prejudice faced by Mexican Americans in the 1940s Los Angeles area.
Yeah, I'm guessing the evidence is flimsy when you're trying to prosecute 22 people.
22 people. Come on.
I mean, maybe
coercion. Like,
yeah.
I'd loved it. I wish I could have found more research about the coercion.
Yeah. In the wake of the Sleepy Lagoon murder, Los Angeles became a powder keg of racial tensions primed to explode. As the city braced for the aftermath, local newspapers amplified the atmosphere of fear and hostility. The LA Times, in its coverage of the incident, sensationalized the violence, painting Zoot Suiters as dangerous criminals. The headline, "Mexican Pachuco Gang Kills Youth," stoked public outrage and fed into racial stereotypes. The outcry against the so-called Zoot Suiters reverberated throughout the city, amplified by sensationalist tabloid headlines. Exploiting fears of juvenile delinquency, Governor Colbert Olson sanctioned a mass police crackdown, resulting in the indiscriminate arrest of over 600 young men and women, predominantly of Mexican-American descent. Subsequent trials in January 1943 saw convictions handed down, but the verdicts were met with widespread condemnation, as many voiced that the proceedings were a complete sham.
On May 31st, 1943, uniformed servicemen and underage Mexican Americans clashed in violence that led to the beating of a U.S. Navy sailor. And then in retaliation, approximately 50 sailors from the local U.S. Naval Reserve Armory marched through downtown Los Angeles, carrying clubs and other makeshift weapons, and they attacked anyone that was wearing a zoot suit or anything that was considered to be racially identified clothing.
You know, have you ever been to that training center? That Navy Armory building is a training center up in Elysian Park now for the fire department.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you just take Elysian Park right down into downtown LA.
Wild. You know, we think of media manipulation of the public as a recent concern, but it's been going on for decades, if not hundreds of years or throughout history, right? In 1943, local Los Angeles media was very comfortable with fanning these flames of both racism and moral outrage. The LA Times reported on June 2nd, 1943, that fresh in the memory of Los Angeles is last year's surge of gang violence that made the Zoot Suit a badge of delinquency. Public indignation seethes as warfare among organized bands of marauders prowling the streets at night brought a wave of assaults and finally murders.
Can you do that again with a transatlantic accent? No, I'm just kidding.
Fresh in the memory of Los Angeles is last year's surge of gang violence that made the Zoot Suit a badge of delinquency.
There we go. Thank you.
That's kind of it. That's my newsreel voice.
For 9 a.m.
Yeah, that's all I can pull out. But again, I mean, it really just focuses it really pulls into focus, I should say, something that we've spoken about many times in this book that I encourage people to read, called The Culture of Fear, because often when you need a bad guy, you go to teenagers. And it's been going on literally, like there's a quote from Socrates talking about how lazy and entitled Greek youth were, you know, that were younger than his generation. Like, this has been going on for thousands of years of just, let's shift our blame onto something that we ourselves were part of just 25 years before.
Yeah. Super lazy, but obviously responsible for all the troubles in the world.
Yes. Won't get off the couch, but clearly driving the economy.
Right. So as the days unfolded, the streets of Los Angeles became battlegrounds, with mobs of U.S. servicemen unleashing their fury on Latinos. Reports from the LA Examiner described how servicemen roamed the streets, targeting anyone donning Zoot Suit attire. "Zoot-suited hoodlums attacked on sight," screamed the headlines, capturing the escalating violence and indiscriminate brutality. Eyewitnesses recounted scenes of horror and chaos, with Latinos, Blacks, and Filipinos alike falling victim to the mob's rage. Carrie McWilliams, a prominent writer, described the carnage in chilling detail, painting a picture of mass lynchings and sadistic frenzies. A mob marches for blood, his account declared, encapsulating the terror that gripped the city. The racial animosity manifested itself in grotesque acts of violence. According to multiple sources, including the LA Sentinel, a Black defense worker, so somebody that was working for the military at the time, was viciously assaulted with his eye gouged out with a knife. Just absolutely a heinous act of racial hatred with someone that was literally on their team as far as being a defense worker, when you have so much of this patriotism versus those they're perceiving not to be patriotic. This just is like encapsulates how bizarre this was, and that it really wasn't even about anything at any point. It's a bunch of angry men, really.
Right. And we don't even have time to talk about how Blacks were treated in the military, like with the segregation and expected to be
right,
cannon fodder. And then on return from the war, we're just treated like absolute shit. Terrible, terrible. Like you said, smudge and, stains on American history. Absolutely. Amid the chaos, local authorities failed to quell the violence, with police often turning a blind eye to the atrocities unfolding right in front of them. Instead, they targeted Latinos who dared to defend themselves, and then that further aggravated all the injustices. The Los Angeles Examiner, in its editorial coverage, justified the vigilantism as a necessary response to a perceived immigrant crime wave, legitimizing the brutality and perpetuating racial divides. The news media continued to vilify Mexican American youth, perpetuating the narrative of inherent criminality. And then the LA Sentinel went on in its ongoing coverage to continue portraying Zoot Suiters as dangerous gang members. Riots raged on for days. As you were saying before, it wasn't just one night, it wasn't just one incident. It was going on for days, and then began spreading beyond downtown Los Angeles to neighborhood communities. Taxi drivers ferried more servicemen to the front lines of the divide, while civilians from across Southern California descended into the city, fueling chaos. The Los Angeles Herald-Express captured the city's descent into madness, reporting on the ban of Zoot Suits imposed by the city council, which was just a futile attempt to stop the violence. I mean, the media and the government and law enforcement has already set this into motion. Yeah. So that's not going to have any effect at all. Finally, as the dust began to settle, a citizens committee appointed by Governor Earl Warren convened to investigate the root causes of the riots, and their findings echoed the sentiments of many. The existence of all these deep-seated racial prejudices just that couldn't be ignored anymore. The committee's report highlighted all these systemic issues plaguing American society within these subgroups, emphasizing that the problem of juvenile delinquency transcended racial boundaries. So, yeah, juvenile delinquency is a problem, but it's not just these immigrant youths. But despite these findings, arrest and prosecutions of Mexican-American youth continued, while perpetrators of the violence largely went unpunished.
I mean, there's some really sad accounts of even some of the Latino youths begging police officers to arrest them and take them to jail because they knew that they would be safer there rather than on the streets, as these mobs of people were just coming into the Los Angeles areas. And then they started to spread into, the South Los Angeles area. And it's just chilling. I mean, thinking, like you said, taxi drivers are just like, okay, get in, servicemen. Let me drive you to the front.
Yeah, put your weapons in the trunk.
Yeah, my God. Reverberating far beyond the streets of Los Angeles and sparking outrage and solidarity among marginalized communities across the country, the riots and trials sent shockwaves across the nation. The ignition of intense debates on civil rights and racial justice opened a door to a broader and more modern discussion of racism. The New York Times, on its coverage of the unrest, highlighted the nationwide impacts of the riots, describing how African American and Latino activists joined forces to condemn racial discrimination and the police brutality. The events of the Zoot Suit riot served as a wake-up call for Americans, forcing them to confront deep-rooted racism and injustice that pervaded society.
The Los Angeles Sentinel, in its coverage of the riots, framed the events as a watershed moment in the struggle for equality, highlighting the systemic discrimination faced by these communities. So again, we're just trying to illustrate and highlight the idea that the media was playing both sides of the coin. There were some people that were editorialists and journalists that were saying, this is really messed up. We need to be aware of this. This is being fanned way too highly into flames. And yet those same newspapers on the other side were publishing things that were demonizing these kids, basically these kids. I wonder if they spent any time demonizing the hordes of people that came in to perpetrate the violence, right? A 1943 article entitled Riots Expose Racial Injustice underscored the broader implications of the riots that emphasized the urgent need for reform within the criminal justice system. The whole country was now becoming aware of just how much the Sleepy Lagoon trial was a complete miscarriage of justice. And finally, media was titrating back and making a trail to where the initial event occurred and its influence and snowballing into these horrific, horrific events. And this abuse of the legal system served as a catalyst for the civil rights movement, and it galvanized activists across the board to demand accountability and equality under the law.
Isn't it interesting that the Sleepy Lagoon murder was sort of the point they trace this back to, but all they're tracing back is a moment where they can villainize them because the victim was Latino as well. So you have Latino on Latino violence, perhaps, but all they're doing is, utilizing it to say, look at what they're capable of, even against their own people.
It's true. I mean, this is something for people out there that may or may not be aware of the Stonewall riots back in New York. That was when the New York police would just do random raids of gay bars and locations where gays and lesbians would congregate, and they were just, hauled off to jail. They were treated horribly. They were abused. Mm-hmm. But there was one night when, there's mixed information about who threw the first brick, whether it was a drag queen or whether it was a black woman, a black lesbian. But there's a point where they just said, we're not going to fucking take this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm not advocating fighting police at all. I'm not advocating for any of that, but I am advocating for, why don't we wake up before things come to violence, right?
Right. In response to the riots, civil rights organizations mobilized to demand legislative and social reforms aimed at combating racial prejudice and discrimination. The NAACP, in a statement issued in the aftermath of the riots, called for an end to racial profiling and police violence against minority communities. The riots also prompted widespread soul searching among policymakers and law enforcement officials, leading to initiatives aimed at promoting diversity and inclusivity within police departments and the criminal justice system.
So let's take a little bit. I mean, this is not like a divergent path. It's not a side quest, as the gamers call it, but a little bit maybe of an education lesson for anyone who's interested in getting back to some of the psychological foundations of in groups, out groups, racism. It's an important concept to understand that I think gets lost in just tossing around the accusation of racism. Mm-hmm. So let me talk about the foundations. Literally throughout known history, and likely even before records were kept, racism has always been this challenging and very deeply ingrained societal issue that is deeply, deeply rooted in very complex psychological and evolutionary drivers. So one very well researched driver is this innate human tendency towards what we call tribalism. And tribalism is in itself a survival mechanism that is very embedded in our evolutionary history. And according to researchers Tajfel and Turner, individuals have an inherent predisposition to categorize others into quote unquote us versus quote unquote them groups. This is a behavior that likely evolved to facilitate cooperation within one's own group, while also supporting and fostering suspicion and hostility towards outsiders, because that allegedly kept you safe. The tribal mentality, while it was once incredibly crucial for survival in ancestral environments, can manifest in the modern world as prejudice and discrimination towards individuals perceived as belonging to different racial or ethnic groups. And you'll note that I said perceived as belonging to different racial or ethnic groups, because perception is reality to the unexamined mind.
Yeah. And it probably did keep us very safe when we just had lizard brains, but we have evolved past that.
Right. Hopefully. Well, we're some of us.
Sort of. I don't know. The world's a weird place these days.
Yeah.
This phenomenon, known as social categorization, can aggravate and increase racial biases as individuals seek to elevate their own group status by denigrating perceived outgroups. As researcher Brewer suggests, the need for positive social identity may drive individuals to adopt prejudiced attitudes and behaviors towards those outside their own racial or ethnic group. Even more research in evolutionary psychology suggests that humans possess a predisposition towards xenophobia or fear and suspicion of strangers as a protective mechanism against potential threats from unfamiliar individuals or groups. This innate fear of the unknown, while once serving an adaptive purpose in ancestral environments, can contribute to perpetrating racial stereotypes and prejudice in our modern societies. Researchers Kurzban, Tooby, and Cosmides argue that the evolution of specific cognitive mechanisms designed to detect and respond to potential threats may lead individuals to view members of certain racial or ethnic groups as inherently dangerous or inferior.
I think this is fascinating because it's talking about two different mechanisms. It's not just one. Maybe if it was one, it would be easier to address, but it's more than one, all hitting the same areas of the brain. Then Bandura, who is a huge name in psychological communities about social learning theory, he asserts that individuals can develop or acquire racial biases and stereotypes through exposure to established cultural messages and the socialization processes that are just normal within their communities and their subgroups. So it could be the cultural messages in the culture of your family, in the culture of your spiritual community, in the culture of your work community, and bigger concentric circles. All of these forces come to bear. And according to this theory, children learn to associate certain traits or behaviors with specific racial or ethnic groups through observation, reinforcement, and imitation of influential figures like their parents, their peers, and of course, here we are today, media personalities, right? Mm-hmm. So as a result, racial prejudices can become deeply, deeply ingrained in individuals' belief systems and behaviors from a very early age. And then this just goes on to perpetuate those intergroup conflicts and discriminations.
So the role of implicit bias, unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that influence behavior and decision-making, is significant, and more recent studies have explored how implicit biases shape perceptions of race and contribute to disparities in areas such as employment, education, and the criminal justice system. Recent research has highlighted the impact of systemic racism on mental health and well-being. Studies have documented the psychological toll of experiencing discrimination and microaggressions, as well as the long-term effects of structural inequality on marginalized communities. And then, like, if you dive even deeper to what we're talking about today, you're talking about in and out groups, and then military, criminal justice system, law enforcement, right? Where, you know, military culture, there very much is this us versus them piece to just their job, especially in times of war, right? Us in our uniforms fighting for this country, and them who are our enemy. And then if you go back to early days of policing, where it was just reactive and dealing with people who had committed crimes in the community, not the, you know, all of the nice community policing stuff that we have now, even though this is still problematic, you do have an us versus them mentality that gets cultivated even more, that maybe necessarily doesn't have to do with race or ethnicity. It's about the good guys and the bad guys. So it's all coming to a head with the Zoot Suit riots, but in the vein of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and if anyone out there is interested in learning more about not only implicit bias, but also looking at your own implicit bias, just Google Harvard implicit bias test. There's a free online test that is very quick, and just be prepared because it's a test. It's not worried about your feelings.
Nope.
But what it will do is show you just how prevalent implicit bias is in all of us. There is no escaping it. You know, our goal as insightful and self-aware sentient beings is to work past those barriers that have been ingrained in us. Be aware of your biases, be aware of your implicit biases regarding cultural stereotypes, racial stereotypes, and try and move past it. It's a long process, but highly would love to see what some comments are if you're willing to go take that
Yeah.
test and report back to
I'll
us.
put
That
the
would be
link
very
in the
cool.
bio. It's nice because you can pick a bunch of different categories
Right.
and it's really quick and it contributes to the research that goes back. So I remember I was like, oh, I'll pick the LGBTQIA one because I'm going to do great at this. And then I was like, oh, I got that score. Like, was
I
it
know.
perfect?
I
What?
know.
So, but it's great. Yeah, I'll for sure put the link in the bio for folks.
Yeah. But wrapping it up, talking just about this particular event, I want to go back and emphasize that this is an event that really needs to be discussed and explored more. I wish there was more than just a couple of media examples, and perhaps maybe there'll be better ones down the road. But the Zoot Suit itself has this influence that has extended way beyond these particular cultural and political significances. It shaped fashion trends for other parts of the world that are still around today. In Trinidad, for example, the adoption of the Zoot Suit style by local men known as Saga Boys represents a rejection of colonial norms and a celebration of individuality. And additionally, the swing revival era that started in the early to mid 90s
Yeah.
just renewed this interest in Zoot Suit fashion with bands like the Brian Setzer Orchestra and Cherry Poppin' Daddies popularizing these styles once again. And I remember even, and here we are always referring to, my Disney adult, as I got accused of being
Yes.
in the reviews, is the swing nights at
Yes.
Disney. And I don't even know if they still exist,
I
but
don't think
it was a
so.
big deal for literally decades.
Like you could
And
go and take lessons and then,
you
or if
could
you
go
were,
and watch people, like they're just unbelievable, like of
yep.
all ages, doing incredible swing dancing. Very, very
Yes.
cool.
Yes. The Zoot Suit stands as more than just a fashion statement. It's a symbol of resistance, cultural identity, and social change. From its origins in African American comedy to its role in the Chicano movement, the Zoot Suit's legacy continues to resonate in contemporary fashion and cultural expression. As a testament to the enduring power of style as a form of self-expression and empowerment, the Zoot Suit remains an iconic symbol of defiance and resilience. If you guys just go on Instagram and search Zoot Suit fashion, you'll see so many fantastic events that people get together and show off their fashion and their style and their cultural heritage. It's really, really neat.
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk about the few entertainment examples.
Very few. So the second we decided to do this episode, we were like, we got to come back to Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. So this, and I know we've talked about this show before, but it's a really great example of a great idea with some fantastic acting and really good production values.
So good. Yeah.
The television series explored a supernatural and dark underbelly of 1930s Los Angeles that was set against the backdrop of this social upheaval and racial tensions between the marginalized Latino community and the nascent but disturbing mainstream support of the Nazi political movement that was uncomfortably common. Very interesting. They tapped into that because also something that's not well known about Los Angeles's history.
Oh, absolutely. Well, not only Los Angeles, but across the country.
Oh, of course.
How much frightening support there was for Germany's Nazi movement at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for our topic today, this show really highlights it well. I mean, you have, the main character, the show starts off, his father is a Mexican American working in the fields, but he grows up, his name is Detective Tiago Vega, and he grows up to become the first Chicano detective at the Los Angeles Police Department. But, it's very much highlighted that he's going back to his family that's living in, some of these communities on the outskirts and the clashes with police. And it does end up highlighting the Zoot Suit riots with a group of Pachucos who are a very big part of the character group in this part of the storyline. So, I mean, I think it's it's one of the best, most, of the contemporary shows that have even touched on the Zoot Suit riots. And they did it really, really well, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. There were so many things about it that were the beginnings of something great, but it wasn't
Yeah.
consistent. The cinematography was phenomenal. The intricate plot lines, had it continued beyond one season, would have been great. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, there were so many things that were left hanging. But these really compelling characters, because not only do they explore the character of this first Latino police officer or detective, but they also have like sort of a fictionalized version of Amy Semple McPherson,
Right, right.
which is a really wonderful way to humanize her particular story.
Agree.
She comes to a very bad end, unfortunately, but it's great. And as tensions escalate during the rival factions that are in this sort of fictional version of it, they do this overlay of supernatural forces, which is really interesting because you see the anger on the part of the Latino community just becoming more and more unhinged. But it's
Mm,
becoming more and more unhinged because there's a demon that is
fueling all of
absolutely,
this.
she's fueling all of it. And then
Yeah.
she has another side of her persona that is fueling the Nazi movement. And
Yep.
then she also has another side of her personality. It's one actress. She's from Game of Thrones. I'm blanking on her name.
Me too.
We got to look up her name. I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on it. I will watch her do anything. She plays all these characters so well. And it's a demon named Magda that is a sister to Santa Muerta, the angel of
Hmm.
death, who's a wonderful, creepy character. But just what you come away from this, one season, which is really great, is that this evil force is playing everybody against each other. I think
Hmm.
that that's a great unifying storyline, is that, you
Yeah.
know, you're being used when you fall prey to your own prejudices, when you fall prey to your own biases, you are setting yourselves up to be just manipulated. Maybe we could use that as a metaphor that the demon wasn't Magda, the demon was the media at the
Yep.
time, you know?
That's right. That's right.
So
Natalie Dormer is the
Natalie
actress.
Dormer, oh my gosh, if I ever meet her, she's like, "You're the one that couldn't remember my name."
She's intense, but she's great in this because all the different parts she plays,
Yeah,
she's
she's so
really
good,
good
and
and
you
creepy.
hate her. I mean, she's
Yeah.
so creepy and so beautiful and so intricately manipulative. But yeah, that
Yeah.
was that was really cool.
Anyway, I went back and watched this whole season when we did the Sister Amy episode, and I found it better and I was able to kind of like stick with it a little bit more. But
Oh, cool.
Penny Dreadful, we love whoever created this series. Please come back with something else too. Let's try
Yeah,
it again.
try it again. I mean, we
The
like
original was so good.
I so wanted Eva Green from the first
I
seasons.
know.
I wanted, it's like, she's a vampire now. She could still be alive. Bring her to LA.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So then, of course, as you mentioned previously, we have the song Zoot Suit Riot by the band Cherry Poppin' Daddies. That was released in 1997. I mean, just post high school for me, part of my core memories here.
Right.
And it was part of their album, which was called Zoot Suit Riot, the swingin' hits of the Cherry Poppin' Daddies. And the song really pays homage to the Zoot Suit culture and the riots that ensued in 1943.
So in 1981, there was a movie entitled Zoot Suit. This is probably the most notable film that directly addresses the Zoot Suit riots. It was directed by Luis Valdez and it starred Edward James Olmos. It is based on a play of the same name. And this film explores the tensions between the Pachucos and the white servicemen that, ultimately resulted in the riots themselves. The fictionalized version is that there's a barrio leader named Henry Reyna and his friends. They are the ones that are unjustly convicted on circumstantial evidence in the Lagoon murders. And the activist lawyer Alice Bloomfield and George Shearer fight for this blatant racially motivated miscarriage of justice to win them their freedom. It is not known to be a great movie, which is too bad because it's a great subject. Hoping maybe there'll be better reproductions of this.
Yeah, I watched the trailer. It's a pretty lengthy trailer, but it very much, I was like, oh, this looks like a play. Like the way that they did the film looks like almost they're just filming a stage play, which I think is an interesting concept. But, Edward
That
James
usually doesn't,
Olmos,
yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't usually
right.
translate well to a broader audience. Let the play be an
Yeah,
inspiration.
right,
There have been some plays that like Glengarry Glen Ross, which was a great stage
right.
play, but as a movie, it became a whole different thing. You just have to have a director and people that are willing to make those adjustments. But yeah, some interesting stuff. If anybody there has stumbled along some better research than we found or better information, please send us an email, because I'm fascinated by this and I want to learn more. Anything is greatly appreciated.
Yeah. I was able to find, I read one book that is fairly short, but it's neat. It kind of clips together a lot of commentary from people who were alive when this happened and were involved in it, and added a lot to the culture also, like what it meant to wear a zoot suit, and work to have the means to have a zoot suit custom made for you. It's kind of nice to hear from the Latino voices that were around in that era. So I'll put a link to that.
Yeah, please
in
do.
our resources as well. All right, everyone. Well, we hope you enjoyed your vintage episode. We will have your next forensic psych episode ready for you next week. And then let us know. I guess we haven't necessarily decided which documentary we're watching yet. So let us know what you guys are watching. We have a bunch to pick from, but always interested in what you guys are interested in.
Exactly.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, guys.
Bye, folks.
We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawl Space Media Network in partnership with Glassbox Media. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
The LA Not So Confidential theme, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license, and you can check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on Twitter at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Please join us each month on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for a live streaming and very interactive broadcast on YouTube entitled Behind the Couch. Stay tuned to all of our social media for our live streaming scheduling announcements.
Subscribe to LA Not So Confidential so you never miss a new episode. And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, and you'll be the first notified about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag coming your way.
Thanks for listening, and join in with us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.